Welcome to the Best Science Medicine Podcast, BS without the BS. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 488th episode of the Best Science Medicine Podcast. My name is James McCormack, and I'm a professor with the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Sciences at the University of British Columbia.
Say that 10 times fast.
I just did.
I'm Mike Allen. I'm Mike Allen. I'm a family doctor and the director of practice support at the College of Family Physicians of Canada. I'm also an adjunct professor at the University of Alberta. And we have a colleague from the U of A here with us again for this episode. Mike, welcome.
Thanks, guys. Mike Colbert here from basement in Edmonton and professor at the University of Alberta, peer team member and rural physician. Just finished a 2-week stint in Peace River, and happy to be here to chat with you guys about, I think it's COVID vaccine potential adverse events.
Yeah.
And then probably putting in context of, we've reviewed some efficacy on the big three trials before, effectiveness on real world evidence, and just shining some light on potential adverse events.
Yeah, and just going through the evidence that we have, because people probably realize that even when you study 40,000 people and examine them very closely, you don't necessarily always pick up everything. Especially, if there are rare adverse events in the in the 1 in 100,000, you are not going to pick those up in people when we only do studies of 40,000 people, and so. And that applies to every drug. You guys know as well as I do. The rare adverse events. We never pick those up when we get new drugs on the market, which is why so many drugs are taken off the market once very quickly once they come on the market. Is we identify these sort of rare adverse events, whether they be allergic or that you can see liver toxicity, you can see kidney toxicity, or allergic reactions, and that's why these drugs are taken off the market in the first year or 2 or 3. And we have to look at the same. We have to look as closely at the vaccines, because there is a possibility of some of these less common adverse events. So what's the data show us there, Mike?
Perfect. Yeah. So let me jump right in. Maybe a caveat that I don't think anything's ever been studied quite like this in these vaccines, and that you've got this whole world being either in a cohort study, RCT, a bit facetious, but the number of people in the looking at, and if you get a pimple on a COVID vaccine, people are writing it down and trying to see if there's so. Just really important that all the readers and listeners know that I don't think there's been anything in healthcare that's been studied to this event. And I'm not trying to downplay it, because I think overwhelmingly all of these potential adverse events are either transient, rate limiting, and if they're significant, and we'll talk about the vaccine-induced thrombocytopenia, they're very, very rare, and the potential benefits far, far exceed the potential harms. However, the playtime on both of them seem to be equal, meaning we're losing a bit of the picture, where we got to remember that the vaccines are 95 plus, the mRNA vaccines 95 plus effective for 2 doses to decrease the likelihood of getting COVID infection, and then even greater than that for hospitalization and death. And maybe AstraZeneca, again, just a little bit less, maybe 70%-ish. And again, we're losing the second part of the story. So jumping into the adverse events. Everybody's got, everybody knows a friend who's had the COVID hangover, right? They got the vaccine. The next day they were tired and they were sleepy. And so the best evidence really is from solicited adverse events, where 650,000 people in the UK had a daily symptom registry to go through. And so solicited means, did you have this? 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 And I think it's really important to know that how it's reported will determine the numbers. That being said, most of these adverse events that we saw in the initial big RCTs were found in this the solicited adverse events in the UK. So fatigue and headache were common. There were 13 to 20% ballparking. Most of them last a day or two and just resolve. Other adverse events were more common if you took AstraZeneca, and again, based on how the UK was offering AstraZeneca, it was a 3-month delay. It was only on 1 dose, and Pfizer's second dose was a little more transient fatigue, sore arm, myalgias. We're more likely to get it in the second dose than the first dose. It was more common if you're younger. I'm not sure if the younger people complain more often or just think, or the older people just say, yeah, this is kind of standard for the course, and more common in women. Anyways, what we found for these transient, minimal sore arm, fatigue, myalgias was very similar to the initial RCTs. So that's very reassuring.
And I would say, there is no placebo group in this data set. So,
absolutely not. Yeah, you're right.
A number of those events, fatigue and headache, would be common in people regardless. And so, by the way, I'm not trying to minimize these numbers. I would say, the range is 13 to 23. It wouldn't surprise me if it was, closer down to, 10 to 15 or whatever, depending on how you looked at it. But again, it's the best data that we have to go, how many people feel, have this sort of post-vaccine issues, and in this case it was 1 in 10 to 1 in 4.
You bet. And again, solicited. So unsolicited means your vaccine, and you have to think it's important enough to actually report it. Report it to your healthcare practitioner, who then has to report it. So again, we have to be very cautious in looking at solicited versus unsolicited. Are you sure you don't have a headache? I mean, that just how you ask the question is going to change the number. So super reassuring, very transient, a little more common in the second dose versus first dose. And I think that's what we're seeing in our clinical practices. At least that's what I've been seeing, both with my clinical practice and my cohort of friends. You bet. Anaphylaxis. So when it first came out, there were a few case reports of anaphylaxis, and I think the first few were on middle-aged women that actually had allergies with previous anaphylaxis to other things. And so in the first month of the national database in the States, there was 10 million Pfizer doses and 8 million Moderna doses, and the best estimate for the incidence of anaphylaxis is about 5 per million with Pfizer and 2.5 million for Moderna. Of those, again, about a third had previous anaphylaxis, and about 80% of them had known allergies. What they were known, I don't remember. I don't know if we got that level of details. Again, so really important, no deaths were reported. And this is why they hold people 15 minutes after, because if you're going to get anaphylaxis, it's normally within this first 15, 17-minute range, and then it's treatable.
And I was going to add, I hope people realize that when you get a prescription for an antibiotic, the risk of an anaphylactic episode is higher than that, like quite a bit.
Yeah, I was going to say,
it's a lot higher.
This reminds me of the Dumb and Dumber movie where she says the chances of them getting together is 1 in a million, and he says, "So you're saying I've got a chance?"
Yeah. Exactly.
So it's like, these 1 in 5 in a million, you're much higher risk for many of the pills we prescribe.
Yeah. Think about pen allergies for Group B strep women and stuff. I used to think about this all the time and think, gosh, are we really making a difference, and what are the numbers? Mm-hmm. Since that initial month, there was a smaller group of healthcare practitioners in Boston that had solicited anaphylaxis, and they found that the rates were higher, about 2 in 10,000. But again, it's solicited, unsolicited, self-reporting. No deaths, and the majority of the people that had anaphylaxis had previous anaphylaxis. Since again, so it depends on who you're studying. But I agree with you guys. These are rare. We're trying to give you numbers when they're very rare. When super rare events are super rare, it depends on who you study. Is it 1? Is it 2 in a million? And does it really make a difference? I think that these are really, really obviously the benefits of a COVID vaccine far outweighs the potential harms. And maybe if you're somebody that had an anaphylaxis to the first dose, may not get the second dose. And maybe you're one of the ones that will say, I'm okay with that 70% efficacy of my first dose. But I think many of these people saying, no, I'm allergic to I don't know, carrots, and I don't want to get the COVID vaccine. I don't think that's really a great reason not to get a COVID vaccine.
And any new drug this happens with every new drug.
And it hasn't been studied, but every new drug is not studied anywhere near the level that these vaccines have been studied. So I think we should find reassurance in that, the initial, again, classic, we're seeing years worth of data being shared in months, where you get the little blip of case reports. That was early in January. And now you get a month worth of data of, 18 million doses, and that gets reported in spring, and again, so we're seeing compression of evidence for the benefit. I think for the overall benefit of informed decision making, where things that normally take years and years and years, we're getting them compressed to weeks and months.
Yeah, and that people say, well, it's so quick. Well, and again, as we said in the last podcast, it's because we needed to do it that quickly. But it doesn't mean it doesn't mean we're cut. If anything, we're not cutting corners at all.
We're over. Yeah, I mean, the number of people that are getting it are allowing for robust data.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think the other thing is resources are being allocated to study this stuff. So instead of don't call me, I'll call you. They're actually going through the vaccine adverse event reporting systems. They're actually pulling data and actually studying all this stuff. So I agree with you guys. I don't think there are no corners being cut. I think it's just the resources, the efforts, and the effort to pull the data out early is being done.
Yeah.
Just shows what you can do when you actually properly resource and pay attention to things. You can find things very, and again, this number of people that get it, they get this type of intervention, you're going to find things very quickly. So I think it's healthy and helpful.
Yeah, no, I agree. But now let's get on to the more a side effect that a lot more people are thinking about, and it's the vaccine-induced thrombocytopenia, because that's gotten a lot of press. And a lot of people are concerned about it, and so let's try and give everyone the numbers that we have.
You bet. So VIT, or vaccine-induced thrombotic thrombocytopenia, is a clot and thrombocytopenia post either AstraZeneca or Johnson & Johnson vaccine. That being said, there's a couple case reports of Pfizer as well, just haven't been propagated through the literature yet. So again, this is probably this is obviously a serious adverse event where there'd be a clot in a funny spot, like a cerebral venous sinus, an atypical stroke-like reaction, that kind of stuff. And so the risk varies. These rare events, again, it depends on who you're looking at. You need to look at large numbers, but the risk varies from the best that we can tell from about 0.4 per 100,000 in the 80 plus years to about 2 per 100,000 in the 20 to 49 years of age. Majority of this is in women under the age of 60 and within 14 days of vaccination. I know my wife, when this was making the media and she was an AstraZeneca recipient, she was thinking about this stuff until months, months out. And so it's within 14 days. Probably the best evidence is from a large cohort of almost 300,000 in Denmark and Norway. And as you know, these Scandinavian countries have excellent records and national databases, and they collect whether it be on cancers or this kind of stuff, they collect stuff exceptionally well. And so they're actually trying to calculate thrombosis events in the excess of natural background risk. And these thrombosis events are VTEs, but also include the atypical and the weird VIT-related ones. And they think that excess post-AstraZeneca vaccine is probably 11 per 100,000 doses.
Yeah, or 1 in 10,000.
Or 1 in 10,000, and mostly in women. And so I think you have to think about so the interesting thing in Canada, and I think most of our listeners are in Canada, it seems like AstraZeneca has disappeared, meaning, we had it, we gave it, and we're really not doing much more down the road. It seems to be, I think the numbers will be much, much less, if any, excess with the mRNA vaccines. And I think the data is still, they're probably still looking at that. There's been a couple isolated case reports of that. So again, in the totality of the evidence, these are very, very rare. The potential benefits of a COVID vaccine, as far as decreasing infection, hospitalizations, and death, far, far outweigh the risk of a VIT. That being said, I think there's some people have concerns about the VIT. And while the lottery, it's a rare event. As to who shouldn't get it, I don't know if we've come that far. Meaning, if you've had a previous unprovoked VTE, maybe those would be somebody that I wouldn't give one of the Astra and or Johnson & Johnson. And again, I think it's a moot point in Canada right now because we're not offering Astra, and I don't think Johnson's come yet. And so I think for somebody who's concerned, maybe we would steer them to an mRNA vaccine. If you're concerned, if you're worried about VIT and you're not sure what it looks like, there's a really great pathway from BC, from your guys' side, and actually talks about how, making a diagnosis, who do you look like, who do you look at, what do you suspect it, what kind of blood tests and or imaging would you help solidify the diagnosis, and then how do you treat it? And it's important that listeners know if they do have a case, that the treatment is different than a classic VTE where we give them low molecular heparin initially and or NOAC, stuff like that. So it's treated a bit different.
Yeah. So and we'll give links to all of this stuff in the show notes of the podcast, and we'll also put links to the tools of practice because that's where all of this information is. But I think that this is. I don't think there's anything else that we needed to talk about from a side effect perspective. I don't think, but.
I think Mike has something on myocarditis.
Oh, yeah, that's right. The myocarditis. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
That was the last one. So when we wrote this adverse event tools for practice, myocarditis, there were a few case reports going through, and we really didn't know a denominator. So we didn't feel we had enough information to publish this. But I think the best evidence has been published last month in a CDC report in MMWR, which is Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. And basically the best that they can determine is that in the States there's been almost 300 million doses of mRNA vaccines, and 52 million of them were given to younger persons, 12 to 29 years of age. Again, the younger people are what seems to be more likely to get myocarditis. They've had in their vaccine, in their VAERS, or VAERS, or Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, they've had about 1,200 reports of myocarditis, with a median age of 26. And when they actually did a subset and actually pulled charts, they did a subset of a few hundred. About 484 possibles. They had about 300, which actually were determined to be cases of myocarditis. For those, the median age was 19, and about 90% were males, and more of them actually happened after the second dose. So the risk, if you look at the risk overall, I think this is, again, in the ballpark of the VIT, 1 in 50, 1 in 60,000, a little more common in younger males with second dose. The good news is myocarditis, these clinical cases are often mild. There's an awareness of them. So somebody gets, say, typical chest pain post-mRNA vaccine, you treat them with NSAIDs, and at the time of publication, none of these people, and including the younger kids that were hospitalized, none of them have died. And so I think that we are seeing something possibly, again, in the order of 1 in 50,000. And again, we're studying this, we're putting the resources, we're pulling data, we're pulling charts, and so I think this is excellent. This is speeding up just the evidence and the science on this. And again, 1 in 50,000 people. Yeah. So again, putting it in perspective, the potential benefits of not getting COVID, not getting sick, not getting into the ICU, far outweighs the potential harms.
Unless you happen to be living on your own in a cabin in northern BC and not come into contact with anybody.
As a young
because then you have a low risk of COVID. So you don't have to worry about it as much.
Yeah. And I think it's important to realize that there is an important background risk to things like venous thromboembolisms and myocarditis. People get myocarditis.
Yes.
I mean,
you bet. Again, we don't normally shine the light if somebody gets myocarditis in Peace River Hospital. We don't shine the light on it, but because this is the science happens. And everybody's in a I don't want to call it a natural experiment, but a large cohort that if something pops up, we're looking at it. And I think that's due diligence in science. And it's very reassuring to see the numbers in the ranges that we're showing. Because when you read the media or follow the news on TV, it looks like every second young male is getting myocarditis and coming into hospital, which is obviously not the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Goodness.
Yeah. So I think it's really important that all of these things be put into context and hopefully people who listen to us, we struggle sometimes with the sort of the people who say that that the vaccine is not being studied enough, it's not FDA approved and all that sort of stuff. And we're trying very hard. Just here's the evidence, and in my mind, it's overwhelming. I mean, it's not even. and people who know what we've been doing for the last 487 episodes know that there's a lot of things that we don't think work very well. This is not one of them.
Yeah, and the data is so consistent. Can you imagine, like, our first line diabetic drug is metformin. Mm-hmm. James, would you say the data for metformin is as consistent as this?
Oh, it's pales. It's so pale you can hardly see it. I mean,
by comparison, and the number of people and the number of, I know metformin's been around a long time, but it hasn't been studied to this level. And the studies have not been nearly as consistent.
Yeah, and in the study that was done, it was 300 people that showed a benefit. So,
correct.
It's 300 versus 40,000.
I know.
And, where you brought up metformin, there's a meta-analysis of metformin showing it doesn't do anything.
Yeah. No, there's other data that shows, there's other trials that show it works, but there's other ones that show it definitely doesn't. And it's all over the map. My example was that it is a standard therapy, mm-hmm. first-line therapy for diabetes. And I think there's a bunch of reasons why it may still be reasonable there.
Yeah.
But that comparator, it only serves really as a comparator for how clear we are about the harms and benefits of these agents.
Yeah. No, I agree. You know what I'd love to see is there are a lot of people with, I was going to say unfortunate in two ways. One, because you don't want to have it, but we also over-exaggerate the harm of things like, pre-diabetes or even diabetes. I would love to know how many people are on metformin who are anti-vaxxers.
How many take vitamins?
Yeah.
How many take antioxidant vitamins, which we know
been
studied in 300,000.
Yeah.
It took that long to get there, and we know they're harmful.
Yeah.
And yet they take them. Yeah. How many take vitamin D? How many take, the jury is out.
The list goes on and on and on and on. And so but the conclusion of all of this is it's not, the evidence doesn't always make decisions for people.
No, the facts, while interesting, are irrelevant.
Yeah. But, I know people who they're not going to listen to this podcast, but if they did, they'd still have a reason for why it wasn't, my chance of getting it is still pretty low. And, I want more, I want to wait for more information, blah, 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 blah. And, if you're evidence-based, I think this is a great example of the world coming together to create an incredible process. And is it perfect? Absolutely not. Are these vaccines without side effects? Absolutely not. Do they work in 100% of people? Absolutely not. And but boy, they seem to do what they are saying they're doing. And then this is someone who has only ever once gotten the flu vaccine. So I'm not even a big flu vaccine person. So it's just, I find.
But you probably lined up for this, James. I bet you.
For a variety of reasons. One, it's, I think from a societal perspective, I think it's a good thing. Regardless of whatever anyone thinks is happening, we are going to get to the point where you will be limited if you don't get it, and you can argue the goodness or the badness of that. But I think. What we've tried to do in these last two podcasts is say this is the best available evidence, and it is pretty darn good.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Mike, anything else you want to add?
No. I want to thank the co-authors on these tools across Canada.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
So Paul Fritsch, Morgan Price, Alex Singer, Manitoba, Jennifer Young, Ontario, our good friend Nick in Montreal, go Habs, Sarah Bradley, and then Tony Nikinchuk, a good friend of mine from Peace River, who I took down the Smoky River on a canoe a number of weeks ago, and he'll tell you all about that.
And I thought you were going to go, and he hasn't been. I thought you were going to say, and he hasn't been heard from since.
Yeah. Although it was, I think he had air a few times. It was super fun.
Yeah, no, that's good fun. So, anything else, Mike? Alan?
Not from this Mike.
No.
Not from Big Mike. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we'll just leave it at that. So thanks as always for listening.
Talk to you later.
So long for now.